I love that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good one. Good for grounding. I'm recording already.
Perfect.
Welcome to Openly Spoken, the podcast to help you show up, speak out, and be seen. On this podcast, we talk about self-love, relationships, sexuality, spirituality, and more. Hi, I am your host, Celia Antonio, and I am a relationship and sexuality coach for ambitious women with a history of toxic relationships who desire to reconnect to their sensuality and who desire to feel worthy of receiving healthy love. I celebrate you for hitting play on today's episode. I hope that you find this very supportive and helpful. And if you could show some support to the podcast by hitting subscribe on YouTube or on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, wherever it is that you are listening to or watching this episode, it would mean the absolute world to me. Thank you so much for being here. Now let's dive into today's episode. Valerie Rubin is an anxious attachment specialist and trauma-informed coach who helps people heal their anxious attachment style so they can become a match for healthy, secure love. She utilizes RTT hypnotherapy, somatic IFS, brain spotting, and nervous system regulation with her clients. She is also the host of the Anxiety Recovery Podcast. This is my first time having a guest who, we serve the same client and we give our client the same thing. We just have different modalities that we use. So my face hurts from smiling. I'm so excited.
Me too. I'm so excited to dive in. This is going to be absolutely amazing.
Yes. So let's begin with your story and tell us a little bit about how you landed into the work that you do today.
Yes. So I initially found myself saying short story short, but I'm like, let's make it long story long. Okay.
Yeah. We have a 90-minute time blocked out for this. So let's do it.
Yes, absolutely. So for me, I grew up with two very emotionally unavailable parents. You know, my mother was very codependent, stuck in her fawn response, and my dad was a narcissist and he had multiple sclerosis. And then one of my siblings has autism and a very high level of care needed. So I learned as a child to make myself small, to try to kind of turn down the chaos by turning down my own internal chaos. And that led to me suppressing my own emotions. And then in adulthood, that really led to a lot of health issues like IBS. I had all the symptoms of fibromyalgia. I had chronic pain. You know, I was in my early 20s and I felt like I was stuck in a 90-year-old's body because I had so much inflammation. It started with headaches, chronic neck pain, stomach problems, really everywhere was inflamed. And then I started to break out with acne because, you know, inflammation is just a warning sign. You know, autoimmune conditions is really signs that you've been suppressing something for too long. Your body is trying to get your attention. And so then in my early 20s, I was Miss Overachiever. I would, work 16, 18 hours a day. I was stuck in workaholism to try to continuously avoid these feelings. And then it got to a point where the health issues were just so bad and the anxiety was so bad. I was seeing a talk therapist. I was doing that for years. And then it just continued to have me feel stuck. And I was still stuck in toxic relationships, just a lot of relationships that were filled with the same dynamics from childhood because, our brain, our nervous systems are wired for the familiar. Our brain hates change. So it will always go towards a familiar hell versus an unfamiliar heaven. So, that made relationships quite...
I love that analogy.
They made my relationships quite turbulent. And then I was very codependent. And I was so stuck in this mentality that a relationship or a job is going to help me feel safe and get out of this chronic anxiety. And that just wasn't the case. And then I found my first hypnotherapist, and that finally led me to reduce my anxiety that was so high. It really helped me to unlearn a lot of these unconscious beliefs of feeling like I wasn't good enough, based on my upbringing, based on my parents' emotional unavailability. I started to internalize that as something's wrong with me, something's not good, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy of love, I'm not deserving of love exactly as I am. And so hypnotherapy allowed me to actually finally quiet my mind and learn how to reduce my anxiety. And then within 6 months, the anxiety became much more reduced. The chronic pain went away completely. It was absolutely insane. I felt the most free I've ever felt, truly. And then I was feeling really good. And then I landed in another relationship with someone who was a covert narcissist. And I didn't even fully realize that he was a narcissist at the time. And I didn't realize that I was trauma bonded because of my past wounds that were resurfaced of codependency, feeling anxiously attached. And really, ultimately, what anxiously attached means is you're chronically in a state of fight or flight. And so then once, it felt when I started to date him, the love bombing, everything I ever wanted, I felt, I was finally in this secure relationship. And then things went really, really fast. We moved in 6 months into dating, which was 4 months, which is absolutely insane. And to me, as someone who was anxiously attached, that felt soothing to my nervous system. It felt like it soothed my fear of abandonment, because if we live together, he can't leave me. And so, which is absolutely insane.
So, but I'm laughing because it's relatable.
Yeah, it is. And a lot of people are in this unconscious dynamic, and it was so unconscious to me. And then it was these high highs and low lows. We would break up for a day, or he would talk about his feelings of wanting to break up with me, and just the criticism. Even he was so particular even about the dishwasher. The dishwasher had to be a certain way. He wanted me to chop an onion a certain way. He would criticize me for that. Just any little thing, it would be criticism. But it was really just an expression of how my inner world was, that was so unconscious, because that's how I was unconsciously treating myself. And so then he ultimately discarded me, because with narcissists, there is a narcissistic abuse cycle, which we can go through. But ultimately, towards the end, the last step is the discarding phase, where they find a new supply or they discard you. And so we broke up, and I was so heartbroken and debilitated in my own pain, and abandonment wounds all came to the surface. And so what ended up happening was, I was working with a coach at the time, and she was like, I think you're trauma bonded, and I think he's a covert narcissist. And that was so shocking to me. And I ultimately started to finally take part of all the roles that I was playing in my own suffering, because it was all me. Our relationships are just a reflection of our internal world. We will not accept anything less than what our nervous system feels familiar and safe with. And so
what you said earlier about the way he was treating you was how you were subconsciously treating yourself, illustrates that. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And then, I started to work with a somatic coach, and it was absolutely mind-boggling, the results that I was having. And at that time, she was like, you need to be single for 6 months. No dating, no flirting, nothing. To a recovered codependent. I was back then I was like, oh my God, how am I going to do this? And I rigorously had to tell myself, no, I'm not going to repeat this pattern again. And so I learned a lot about the nervous system, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, what was triggering me into that was keeping me in this relationship. And then I also learned how to stimulate my vagus nerve, ultimately because I was carrying so much trauma in my body and my nervous system, my vagus nerve stopped functioning properly. And that's really what ends up happening. If you've been exposed to chronic stress or trauma, your vagus nerve stops functioning properly. This leads to those gut issues, health issues, chronic anxiety. The vagus nerve controls whether or not your fight or flight system turns on. So when I started to learn how to stimulate it through breath work, meditation, doing different somatic exercises, then it helped me to dial down even more on this anxiety. And so even I did a somatic, session, it's called somatic IFS, somatic parts work, which stands for, IFS stands for internal family systems. It's really just looking at the different parts of you that are causing you to stay stuck in your life, these patterns that are causing you to stay anxious, codependent, people-pleasing in your relationships. It causes you to look at, what is this need meeting and how can I meet that for myself? Includes inner child healing. And it was about a few months after this relationship ended. And, I did this somatic coaching session, this somatic parts work session, and I had this huge craving to reach out to my ex. I really just wanted to reach out to him, but I was like, this other part of me knew that's not a good idea. That's not a good idea.
Self-sabotage is creeping up.
Yes. It was just that part of me was looking to just continue to heal my inner child, because all of that was popping up to the surface. So what ended up happening was, in this coaching session, I uncovered a memory where my mom left me ultimately I felt abandoned when I was really upset, and things like that. And I was so young at the time. I was 4 years old in this memory. When you're 4 years old, you do not know how to regulate your own nervous system or self-soothe. You are dependent on your caregiver to help soothe you. And so when you don't have that, it becomes very dysfunctional. And that's where a lot of this anxiety stems from. It's just these suppressed energies and emotions that are stuck. And so as I'm diving deeper into this coaching session, I'm noticing, wow, this feeling, this craving that I have for my ex is the exact feeling I had when I was 4 years old, waiting for my mom to come back.
Wow.
Absolutely insane.
That makes sense.
So, yeah. And so it was just absolutely crazy. But ultimately, going a few steps backward, so when I had that realization about the anxiety and when hypnotherapy was really helping me, I decided to ditch my plan of getting my PhD in clinical psychology, because, hypnotherapy and these somatic modalities were helping me much more than the talk therapy that I had in the past. And so I was doing hypnotherapy and coaching, and it was really helping people with anxiety, but what was keeping them stuck was their current relationships, toxic relationships, trauma bonds, everything really in the body, even at a deeper level. So when this breakup happened, I started to learn a lot of these somatic modalities called brain spotting, somatic IFS, learning all about the vagus nerve, nervous system regulation, all of that, as well as somatic therapy. And so once I really learned all of that and started to experience these own modalities on myself, that's how I really switched to anxious attachment, because people were getting stuck and weren't getting results because of the relationships and dynamics that their body felt familiar with. And you can't think or talk yourself out of an anxious state or to a secure attachment. You have to rewire your body, your brain, your nervous system. And so these somatic modalities really allowed me to do that. And I never broke no contact, after we broke up. And, I was able to get into a healthy relationship after that. And my life has been so much better. And I get to help people now through all of this. But it was a huge, huge transformation for me. And as you can see, I'm not struggling with, all these breakouts on my face. I'm not wearing makeup. I don't have chronic pain anymore. And it's just a completely different life when you work with the body.
Yes. Your story is so relatable.
I hear
Yeah.
that. Yeah. Yeah.
I remember there were like so many parts that you shared where I'm like, ooh, like these are some threads I wanted to like pull out.
Yes. I know I shared so much.
But yeah, so relatable with like when you are not speaking up for yourself and you're not sharing what you really want to share and you're holding so much in, your body finds other ways to express itself by having acne pop up. The same thing happened to me, or having inflammation. Like that's your body trying to express yourself, to
Mm-hmm.
express itself, because you're not doing it through your voice. I thought that was an
Mm-hmm.
interesting thread, and I've been there myself.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get into you talked about how your vagus nerve stopped working,
Mm-hmm.
and there might be people listening who are like, what?
Mm-hmm.
What is that? You mentioned that the vagus nerve is something that regulates your fight or flight response. Um,
Yes.
what else would you share with someone listening who is like hearing about the vagus nerve for the first time?
Yeah. So ultimately, the vagus nerve, it's controlling whether or not your fight or flight system is turned on. So if you are chronically in a state of fight or flight, if you're chronically anxious, if you're chronically depressed, that's really giving me a signal that, and it's perking my ears up that your vagus nerve is not functioning optimally, because
Mm-hmm.
your vagus nerve is wired to bring you back into homeostasis, and it connects from your brainstem all the way to like all throughout your spine, your spinal cord, like all throughout your body. And so it regulates all these different things in the body, like mucus production, your digestion, even like frequency of urination. Like a lot of clients,
Wow.
when you're really anxious, you'll pee a lot, you'll go to the bathroom a lot. It's because your vagus nerve isn't functioning at an optimal level. And so really
Mm.
simple ways that you can stimulate your vagus nerve is through breath work, humming, singing, gargling, like gargling, even like mouthwash or salt water. Um, so many different like somatic exercises as well. It's very powerful, and it can help you to stimulate that. So now your body's new baseline is regulation. You're able to regulate yourself. You're able to come back into your parasympathetic nervous system, meaning you're able to come back to a relaxed state.
Mm-hmm.
And then you naturally, in relationships, will feel uncomfortable or get the ick from someone who is emotionally unavailable or isn't in that same nervous system state, because it's not
Yes.
familiar with you anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And also your needs are like your subconscious needs are completely different. Like you're no
Mm-hmm.
longer looking for, like when you shared that you had this craving to reach out for your ex because doing the internal family systems work, like your inner child was popping up, and that like same craving from when you were 4 for your mom was what was coming up, because that's what we're doing when we're dating. We're like trying to
Mm-hmm.
meet unmet needs in childhood. But when you
Mm-hmm.
do this kind of work, you start to meet your own needs, whether on your own, or I think there are also a few needs that you can meet, like speaking from a personal level.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for someone that has like a mother wound, there's a lot of needs that like I needed from my mother that I get now either from myself or from my relationships with other women, like who are able to
Mm-hmm.
really like witness you. And then
Mm-hmm.
you go into dating needing completely different things that are more aligned with
Mm-hmm.
having a healthy relationship, not something that's codependent.
Absolutely. And codependency is ultimately just a sign that you struggle to self soothe because,
Yes, that's such
you
a
weren't
simple way to put it.
taught.
I love it.
It really is. It's like codependency. And if you're listening to this and you're like, what is codependency? What does that mean? A lot of my clients describe it as, if my partner is safe, I'm safe. If my partner's having a bad
Mm,
day, I'm having a bad day. And so then that becomes such a like awful way to live your life, because now your safety is entirely dependent on someone else's mood and behavior. And yeah, I love that you mentioned meeting your own needs, because if you don't know how to mention if you do not know how to meet your own needs, it's going to be hard to even get your needs met in a relationship, because you don't know your needs. You don't know how to
yes.
meet them yourself. So how can someone
Yeah.
else do that for you. And a lot of people even tell me that they don't even know what their needs are. And it's important to learn. Also, it's like, what do you frequently most complain about? When you realize that, your complaints are a doorway into your unmet needs.
That's going to be very helpful for at least one person listening.
Absolutely.
Your complaints are a doorway for your unmet needs. I love that. Yeah.
Thank you.
People also, like, you're welcome. People also don't know, like, what they even value sometimes, or desire, or like it's needs. And it's just, I feel like when you're unregulated, you don't even know who you are.
Absolutely. Because when, especially like if we're talking about trauma and anxiety, they create such a small life, because like a lot of people, they have symptoms of like agoraphobia, or they're so anxious they don't even want to leave their house. Then that creates, and now you're avoiding the triggers. You're avoiding going to the grocery store. You're avoiding dating because you don't know how to self-regulate. So then your life becomes very, very small. You aren't able to expand because you don't have capacity to expand. You're too dysregulated. And so it's important to learn how to meet your needs, to learn how to self-regulate, because if not, you're going to have a very, very small life.
Yeah. Yeah. I always wonder if there's any, like, and I wonder what you think about this, if there's any, like, maybe what do you call that when you're like born with a certain trait?
Preconception?
Preconceived.
Or inherited?
Inherited traits to be willing to do, because what you just said about it creating such a small life, I think a lot of people are comfortable in that small life because looking at your past and what you need to heal is terrifying for a lot of people. So they would rather not do it. And then they, like, I don't know. I wonder about if are people just born like, okay, I'm good with that. Or are some people born in a way where they see things like that? Because this is how I am. I see something that I'm scared of, and I go towards it because I know that's going to help me grow. And I've always been like that for some reason. I know, like, oh, that over there is scary, so let's go towards it so I'm not scared of it. And then I can move on to the next thing because I don't want to be scared of life.
Yeah, I feel like that's a great question of like, is that something that's inherited or not? I feel like also it's like depends on your personality and also your attachment system. And I'm sure you've done a ton of work on yourself, so that reflects in how much you're willing to go toward your emotions, towards your looking at your past, even though that feels scary. Because I'm very much like you, Celia. Like my parents, like my mom would see talk therapists, and while that can be helpful, it never got to the root of her issues. You know, my parents went through a separation in 2021 or something like that. And she finally realized, and her therapist told her, all of these like signs that that my mom was describing were signs of emotional abuse. And instead of my mom like looking at that in the face and leaving, she decided to switch therapists. And it's like, she decided to switch therapists. And she's still in that. And so it's like, that is her choice, unconscious or conscious. But also, it's like, I have always been like you, where I'm like, if there's something in my way, I'm going to look at it dead in the face. Even when I was really young, I always was like, I don't want to live the life that my parents lived, where their life was so small. Like even my father, he's also an entrepreneur. He owns his own business. And when my brothers were born, they're 2 years older than me, he decided to, leave his business and get a job. And now he only did his business part-time because he just didn't fully believe in himself. But yeah, I also think like if you're avoidant attached, if you're more avoidantly attached, if we want to use that label, they will move away from that discomfort. They won't look at that in the face. Versus maybe someone who's more anxious or secure, they're going to move toward the threat because they want to, create a different life.
Yeah. Yeah, I had someone on the podcast recently who talked about anxious attachment, and she was talking about how people with anxious attachments are usually the people doing something to fix a relationship.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's the closest to secure for that reason, because they're like, okay, something's wrong. Like, let's fix this. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they'll go toward the threat and
Yeah.
versus moving away from it.
Yeah. Yeah. I love how you mentioned too, before you answered that question, about like doing a lot of work on yourself first. Because there are definitely things that I was scared of when I was younger that I ran away from. But then when I was older, I was like, okay, it's time to look at this. It's time to look at my fear of public speaking. Like 10 years ago, I would not be on this podcast talking to you right now. There is no way. What about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I had debilitating fears of sharing my authentic truth, debilitating fears of like being authentic, because I didn't learn that it was safe to do that. And so being on podcasts and I have my own podcast, it was extremely healing in a way of me reclaiming that. Once I healed a lot of those fears of being seen, fears of sharing my truth. It's all just so important to have healthy relationships and have a healthy life ultimately. And like, even when I was really young, it's so funny. I don't share this often, but I think I was like around teenage age. This was when I was like the most going through my stuff. Like I definitely needed like support, like, from a therapist or coach or something. But I felt like, oh, they just sit there. They don't actually do anything. Like, what are they doing? I'm going to pay someone to talk
about
to them.
A therapist?
Yes. That was like my whole thought, which I find hilarious because that's the role I'm in now. Which I know I laugh at myself. I just think that's hilarious. But it's like, it was just me avoiding like those deeper things. And also, like, when I was a child, I had like talk therapists that were not helpful at all. So I think that also at the time, like, impacted, should I get help or not?
Also, when you're young, you think you know everything, but you don't know anything.
Absolutely. I think a growth mindset and someone who's actually like very intelligent is someone who feels like they know nothing, in a way that they're so open to learning everything. They feel, there's always more to learn, because that's just so true.
It is true. Because there's what you know, there's what you know you don't know, and then there's this whole world out there of things you don't know that you don't know. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. You really don't know what you don't know. And that's why I think somatic work and diving deeper into your unconscious mind is key for that. Because a lot of it, we don't logically know why we feel fearful about public speaking, for example. But it's the public speaking is just the object of a trigger. It reminds your nervous system of a time where you didn't feel safe to speak up, where you didn't feel safe to share your needs, where you didn't feel safe to be seen.
Yes. And it makes so much sense when we feel that, because like you mentioned earlier about being 4 years old and wanting like that craving for your mom to be there. And you said when you're 4, you don't know how to soothe yourself and you're dependent on your caregivers. Because you're dependent on your caregivers, that's like it feels like you're going to die when you don't get your needs met. So then that's why when you are public speaking and that's that trigger for you, it literally feels like you're going to die. Like that's what your body thinks is happening. And I think it's all about slowly growing your capacity to be with those feelings and to just like be with the raw sensation of it. And obviously like process them and all that stuff. And little by little you learn, I won't die if I share my opinion. And I won't die if someone disagrees with my opinion. Mm-hmm. But it is terrifying Absolutely. When you start.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I'm so glad you mentioned this part and this feeling of like, I'm going to die, like this feeling like I'm going to die when I step toward that. Because for example, like even using my example with my previous ex, like I felt like it didn't even feel like an option to leave, even though there were clear signs that were like, you needed to leave. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But literally I was just running away from this feeling of feeling like I was going to die. Like I felt like I was going to die without my partner, because unconsciously, when you have these unhealed inner child wounds, you go into relationships and you project them as your survival. Your nervous system associates them with your safety. Your nervous system associates them as their parent.
Yeah. Man.
Crazy.
So I know there's a couple of modalities you wanted to speak to today. One of them, if I remember correctly, is called brain spotting.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
What is that?
Yes.
I've never heard of it before. until we met on our like last connection call. I'm like, what is that?
You're like, what is that? So I like to use this really, really simple explanation of brain spotting. So brain spotting helps you to locate where your trauma memories are stuck in your body so that you can release them. That way these triggers stop showing up in your present day. So what this looks like is, let's say we're using this feeling I'm going to die, this fear of abandonment. Say your partner is even just going away for the weekend and you're scared to be alone. You feel like you're going to die. What I first have clients do is locate, where do you feel that fear of abandonment coming up? Usually people describe it as, I feel this pressure in my chest, not in my stomach. I feel really hot. I feel tension in my head. Okay. So we first identify what are those sensations, what emotions are present. Usually it's like fear, worry, just feeling scared. And then I ask them to rate it. How intense does this feel on a scale of 0 to 10? 10 being the most intense, 0 being it doesn't impact you at all. Usually clients will say, between 6 and 9, sometimes 10 if it's really, really triggered and activated. So then if you notice that you're talking to someone and they look up or down or to the side, that's a sign that their brain is processing something. So brain spotting helps you to activate where those trauma memories are stuck by looking out in your visual field. Meaning, so say the client says, I have a big pressure in my chest when I think about my partner leaving for the weekend. I have them look around the room and find a spot that amplifies these feelings, because that's triggering your subcortical brain. Meaning that's just triggering your deeper parts of your brain where the initial trauma is stored. And then we process it and we release it through the body.
Cool. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the most honestly, the most transformative modality. It's honestly my favorite. It's honestly my favorite. It shows up different images, memories, sensations. Like it helps you to recognize patterns that you didn't even realize were there or where they were stemming from. And you're able to be like, wow, I can see that it was from this and I can see how this is connecting. And it helps you to get so unstuck from it. And by the end of it, they're like, oh, I feel great that my partner is leaving to, go for the weekend on a business trip. Like I finally feel a sense of relief in my body. That's typically what they say. Yeah. They say, oh, I feel like I can finally take a deep breath.
Yes. And that's why, to illustrate that point that you mentioned earlier, you can't think yourself into that, because it's a feeling. That feeling of relief in your body is a feeling that you can't trick yourself into feeling by saying, I feel relief in my body. I feel relief in my body. By like saying the affirmation, you can't think it. You have to feel it.
Absolutely. And that's why trying to logic your way out of it won't work either. Because
it doesn't work. It creates like a fake persona.
Correct. And ultimately what you're doing is you're abandoning your inner child.
Yes.
which is familiar.
Yes. And then that's creating more anxiety.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I could talk about this all day.
Yes.
What you mentioned in the beginning of that, where the person brings up an event that's triggering them, like their partner leaving, and they feel into the body and locate where it is. That's very similar to something I do in my coaching. I just don't do I don't do brain spotting, so I don't do the other steps. And yeah, it's very powerful to get people to notice sensations in their body. Especially for me being a relationship and sexuality coach, like feeling sensation and being able to voice what a sensation is so hard for a lot of women, especially women with anxious attachment, women with a history of toxic relationships, and even, you know, women who relate to your story, which I relate to as well, where we grew up with parents who were just not emotionally available because it was a coping mechanism for us to detach from our sensations, because then we don't have to voice those sensations.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you brought that up. Yes, because when you're anxiously attached or you're chronically anxious, you are detached from your body and you disconnect from your body and you go into your mind. That's why there's so much rumination, overthinking, anxiety, and worry. But that's ultimately like a trauma response. It's a way that your body learned to stay safe. And so when you learn to actually notice and label what sensations am I noticing in my body, then when you're in a dating situation and they do something that is kind of a red flag, your body will tell you and will ultimately like scream at you. Like it'll scream at you, this guy isn't for me, where you cannot betray your body anymore. Yes. And so you're so connected to your body, it will tell you when something is not in alignment. And I love to even use an example. Like I'm currently single now, and I went on a date about a month and a half ago with this guy. And I just, as soon as I saw him, I immediately felt this ick, like this, I just felt repulsed by this guy. Like this sounds mean, but like whatever. Like I just felt repulsed. Like I felt immediately hot. I immediately felt contracted, constricted. I did not feel good in this guy's presence. And I have like a strict boundary. Like this is for me. Like I don't kiss on the first date. This is just what feels good for me. And we can talk more about why. But yeah, like that's my boundary. And so like he kissed me on the cheek and then he was like, oh, sorry. Like I remember you didn't do that. And I was just like, it was just weird and uncomfortable. Oh, that's weird. Really weird. And then
it sounds like he's trying to push boundaries a bit, and I don't like that.
Yes. And then we were at this coffee shop. I always do like dates, especially if I meet them like online or, you know, through a dating app, always in person, like always, you know, make sure that you're safe. And I look up for like half a second and he's like, oh, like, are you checking out a guy? And I was like, I was so repulsed.
Red flag.
Yeah. It's a screaming red flag. Yeah. It's a burning flag.
Yes. That's emotional abuse to say that.
It is.
That was emotional abuse.
Yeah. And I was just instantly like, ugh. And then like the date ended shortly after that. And then he like held my hand, like walked me to my car. I almost like didn't want him to walk me to my car, but it was like in a public, it wasn't like in a garage or anything. And I was just like immediately repulsed. And as soon as I got in my car, I like messaged him, this isn't a fit. And he literally messaged me like, oh, there's no way I could get a second chance. And I was like, absolutely not. Like, I was just like, I'm just not interested. This isn't a good fit. And it's like, that's all signs of low self-esteem. Like my body was, and all of these red flags that he was showing, my body was correct by the first like initial seeing this person.
That's so interesting how our bodies can feel. Like, I think we feel things before. Yeah, okay, this makes sense. We feel things before we know how to put words to it, because that's how we were born. We weren't born talking. We were born just feeling things, and then the like words of whatever our mother tongue is came online. Yeah. So that's so interesting that your body was like, nope, immediately. Yeah.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
absolutely. Absolutely. And even when I think back like to the ex that I discussed here on the podcast, I remember like, cause we were friends for a little bit before we started dating officially. And I remember he asked me to be his girlfriend and he said, "This feels so right." And my body, I remember I immediately was like, I just felt constricted. And I remember thinking immediately, something like it doesn't feel right. Why does it not feel right? And then I was trying to like think my way out of it at that time because I was so afraid of abandonment and all these things. But it's like your body knows before your body has an innate intelligence. It has never steered me wrong. Like when I'm connected to my body, it's never steered me wrong. And it's just very, very powerful when you can learn to utilize this and listen to your body. And when you heal your fear of abandonment, you're not going to be afraid to let someone go or tell someone, "Hey, I'm not interested in another date."
Yeah. Yeah. Because you have more trust that whatever's meant for you you will receive it.
Yes,
Period.
absolutely. Absolutely. Period. Oh, and one more thing I wanted to talk about was sensations, with what you talked about. When we have experienced pre-verbal trauma, meaning you've experienced trauma from 0 to 3 years old, or even in the womb, like Celia said, you don't have those words yet. So a lot of the time when you feel like this body-based emotion and you don't know why, this huge sensation or emotion and you don't know why, a lot of the time it can be because of pre-verbal trauma. And that's what brain spotting helps you do, because we're not talking at all. It's just exploring your sensations and emotions.
Yeah. That makes so much sense.
And they use brain spotting on like babies with like birth trauma, which is pretty crazy too.
That's cool.
Yeah.
We are so lucky with everything that we know now, because we both share that we had parents that were emotionally unavailable. They didn't have therapists on Instagram making these pretty graphics telling you like, "Hey, are you doing this? You might be emotionally abusing your kids." Like, we did not know. We didn't know as much then as we know now. We have so much information in our fingertips. So hearing that, I'm like, yes, like we're progressing even more. Like babies are getting brain spotting therapy. That's wild.
Yeah, it's absolutely wild. It's really transformative. And yeah, like a lot of parents just didn't know better. And it's not to excuse them, because they could do better. Everyone can do better.
Yeah.
Like,
it's not to excuse them. However, I think if you can have compassion for them, it shows you that you have done the work on your healing. If you're still angry and resentful, there's still more work to be done. There's nothing wrong with that. And you are justified in your feelings because you had unmet needs. However, they are who they are, and you can't change them. And you can't keep waiting for them to meet your needs. You can't keep waiting for them to go to therapy.
Scream it louder. Yes. And absolutely. Because
I wish
literally,
we could.
yeah. Like, I wish I could magically snap my fingers and my mom would have like went to therapy and like left and got a divorce. But like, that just didn't happen. All of the healing I've done, obviously everything my parents have done, like a lot of it was wrong, and they're so wounded. Like, they're very I can see their inner children still like impacting their whole life.
It's so heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It's so heartbreaking. And you can see everything that they want is available for them, and they are the ones stopping them.
Absolutely.
But you can't tell them that, because when you're in that state, because we've been there, you like hearing that just feels gaslighty.
Yes. And even like at the time, this wasn't helpful, but even my therapist, one of my old therapists, she was like, "I just think your parents, like, you're so much smarter than your parents." And like, that's true, but it's literally because I've been able to like do the work on myself, so I'm not stuck in a developmental stage. Like, I feel like my father is like literally wounded and stuck at like, a 5-year-old level. And then he puts this facade on. And then my mom is like stuck in like a teenage body. Like she's in a teenage mind, I mean. But yeah, it's like, it's so important to like heal your inner child so that you're not projecting your shit onto them. And, you will, but it's like, okay, how can we minimize the damage? Like I think also when you learn how to repair and sit in your own discomfort and your own feelings, then you won't be projecting. Like you won't be blaming or deflecting, all these things that hinder children's development.
Yeah.
It's like those healthy repairs. That's what your younger self needed. And so when you do inner child healing work, you're not just healing it from your, 29-year-old brain. You're healing it, like your brain doesn't know the difference between a real and imagined event. So when you're going back and healing this 4-year-old version of you, you're literally healing that in real time. And so your body doesn't have any concept of time. And so when I started doing inner child healing work, like with all of these things, it's like, oh my God, that's so powerful and healing. And I just remember doing it for the first time in hypnotherapy. And I just remember like sobbing, like meeting my inner child, like seeing how neglected she was, seeing how anxious she was. It was just absolutely wild. And then I was the one who went over and rescued this younger version of myself and soothed her. And that is so powerful because when you learn how to do that, you become the securely attached parent that you needed back then.
Yes. And that's the biggest gift you can give yourself. Yeah.
It is.
What are your favorite ways to play with your inner child now that you are that securely attached parent for your inner child?
What a fabulous question. So I would say 2 things. And no one's asked me that, by the way. So I love that. Every single week, I will go to Barnes & Noble. I'll do a mix of journaling where I just kind of brain dump any worries, anything that's like on my mind, anything that I want to just process and just like get to know a little bit more. And then I always ask like my inner child, I always ask like, what do you want to share with me? I literally like almost switch roles in this journaling practice. And then I ask like, what do you need to hear from me? And then I'll tell her everything she needs to hear.
When you do that?
I don't. Okay. But my writing, like a lot of the time will become more clear as I've become more in tune with my like adult self. There's like different studies on that where like, as you're processing things, like your writing will become more messy and it's like super, super wild. Wow. But yeah, so I do that. And then I have like a mindfulness coloring book and I literally will take markers and I'll color and I'll do that. Yeah. I'll do that every single week. And it's like no rules, no staying inside the lines, but like, I like it to look a certain way just because it makes me feel happy with the different colors. And it's like, that's also her. And so it's like, and I listen to a inner child playlist. It's just like really sweet, like gentle music. And and so it's like, I do that every single week. And when I don't do that, I notice more abandonment fears will come up because it's like, I'm meeting my inner child every week. And that's a non-negotiable for me.
Yeah. It's like if you had a daughter and you're like, this is our tradition that we do every week. Like we spend quality time together. Yeah. That's so sweet.
It's so wonderful. And even like now when I'm doing brain spotting or I'm doing inner child healing now, I will see myself always like, it's like, well, where do you want to take this little girl? Like in your mind, it's always back to Barnes and Noble. Like that is my safe place. I love that. And it's just like amazing because you're repairing that connection. With yourself.
Were you a big reader as a kid? Is that why Barnes and Noble is the place?
I actually wasn't. Like as a child, I really struggled with focusing because I was so dysregulated and I like had ADHD or that big distractor part. And that's something that I still continue to work on now is that ADHD part. But I think Barnes and Noble is just a safe place. Like it just is so
It's
soothing
quiet.
to me.
It smells good in
Yeah.
there. Especially if it's one with a Starbucks.
Yes, that's what I was gonna say next. I'll usually I used to get matchas from there. Now they don't make me feel good. I'm more connected. I'm even more connected to my body. It's like the matchas are really sugary from Starbucks, so they don't make me feel good. So I'll usually get her a warm tea, and sometimes I'll get her a gluten-free Rice Krispie treat from there.
Oh, that's
it's just
fun.
A great time. Yeah, and it's that's really doing it for me.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, what's something that you do that heals your inner child?
I like to read fiction. That helps me connect with my inner child, because when I was opposite to you, I would escape into fiction, but nonfiction books, I could not focus. A nonfiction book, I would read a whole page, all the way up until mid to late 20s. I could not read a nonfiction book because I would read a whole page and be like, I have no idea what I just read. Let's start over. And that would be happening until I'm like, okay, I'm going to put this book down. I can't read this. So I like to read non-fiction. I'm currently reading Alice in Wonderland, and but it's also Lewis Carroll's other works. There's Sylvie and Bruno in there, and a couple of other stories. It's a thick book I found at Goodwill, and my inner child wanted it, so I bought it for her.
Yes.
I also like to, whenever I can, buy things that are sparkly.
Yes.
She loves sparkles. I saw the other day, I saw a car. It was a Tesla, and it had this white iridescent wrap paint job. And my inner child was like, I want that. I want that on a car. And I told my husband, he's like, that's probably $5,000. I'm like, I want that one day. That's going on. That's goals right there.
That is.
It doesn't have to be a Tesla, but it's the wrap that I liked because of all the rainbows, all the rainbow colors. I really loved rainbow as a kid, and then I remember I got I would always wear rainbow stuff, and then once I got to high school, I would get made fun of, and I was so naive that I did not know that the rainbow flag is part of LGBTQ, and there were all these rumors that I was a lesbian and people making fun of me and stuff. And then I remember I would just stop wearing my rainbow stuff because I'm in high school you want to fit in. But I also like to draw to connect with my inner child, and I'm left-handed, but I'll draw with my right hand because I read this there's this book called Healing Your Inner Child by Dr. I want to say her name is Lucia Capaccione or something, an Italian therapist that specializes in inner child stuff. And I like to just draw what's around me. It's funny, I have a lot of drawings of my husband just scrolling on his phone because I'll draw it when we're just relaxing in the living room. And I have this, if I had my iPad here I'd show you, but I have this photo on my iPad that I drew, and it's just my husband on the phone like this. It's really funny. It's really funny because it's my inner child's point of view of him.
Yeah. That's so funny.
Yeah. And I also love to sing with my inner child, and I also have a playlist.
Yes,
it's on Spotify. We should swap our playlists.
Yes, I would live for that. Speaking of, I'm also left-handed, but I read and I learned that's really good that you draw with your right hand, because when you're doing something with your non-dominant hand, writing, it's rewiring neural pathways in your brain when you're doing that.
Cool.
Yeah.
I when I asked you earlier with the journaling, if you switch hands, in that same from that same doctor in her book, she recommends to do journaling with your inner child, but when your inner child is writing, to do it with your non-dominant hand. Wow. And then it looks like a child wrote it.
It will.
Yeah.
Yeah. That'll be really difficult. I'm going to try that this weekend.
Yeah.
Shoot.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah, it's a good one. Okay, I'm going to take a peep at our little list of the other modalities that we wanted to cover. Let's see. I don't know. I can't find my phone. I had it open and I think I must have X'd it out.
Oh, well, some that I do, it's like the inner child healing, brain spotting, somatic IFS. We talked about hypnotherapy. Like, we could talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
Nervous system regulation. We could also talk about the fawn response and like people pleasing and some somatic exercises.
Let's dive into that.
Yes.
Yes, please.
Okay.
A lot of people are not familiar with fawn response because there's fight, flight, freeze, and those have been like the most talked about. And I don't know if fawn is something that we've only later on realized, or do you know what the story is with that?
I don't know, like, the origin of, like, I don't know why. Like, even one of my old business coaches, he's also, like, a dating coach. And I was on his podcast, and I was talking about the fawn response, and he's like, what's that? And I'm like, wow. Like, you're a dating coach, and you don't know what that is.
Yeah, I had someone on as well who was a conscious dating coach, and I mentioned the fawn response, and she didn't know what it was. And I'm like, why don't people know about this?
I think there's a lot of like preconceptions or like judgments. Like, people think that people pleasing is something that you choose or it's something manipulative, when really your body has learned to do that out of survival. So if you've had a parent who is narcissistic, or maybe a parent who's an addict, or just a parent who is unpredictable, if you couldn't fight, if you couldn't freeze, and if you couldn't run away, your body learned it was safest to fawn. That was one of mine as a child for years. Like, with my brother who has autism, I would just caretake and take care of him, and my dad as well. Like, I would just take care of him. And so it's like, hello, parentification. But it's like people pleasing. You don't know any other way on how to survive. And then these unresolved patterns stay in your nervous system. And then you go into a relationship, and your partner goes away from work and asks you, oh, is it okay if I leave? You're of course going to say yes, even when you want to say no, because you're terrified of them leaving you. It's a way to protect yourself in the face of perceived or real criticism, abandonment, or rejection. It's something completely unconscious.
Yes.
It's not manipulative.
And, it's not. You're doing it for survival. And what I find very interesting, around you, no one can really tell something's wrong because you're acting like everything's okay. Especially if you are also the type of person who's like very ambitious and like go-getter and stuff. On the outside, people are looking at you like, oh, she's so happy. She has her shit together. And she's, look at her doing all these things. And but really inside, there's like turmoil happening in there. Yes.
And I think also the people pleasing has a lot to do with, how did your parents respond to you emotionally as a child? Because for me, it's like, initially it was like shame, or my mom would like leave the room, and my dad would immediately need something because he was very attention seeking, and he would take away like her, almost like her nurturing in a way. And it can be so unconscious. And even after all the years, like, I've worked on my people pleasing response. Last year, I went on vacation with one of my best friends, Emily Colligan. If you don't know who she is, she's like a narcissistic abuse specialist, and she's cool. Like, she's very like attuned. Like, she can pick up on that shit easily. And we could talk about hypervigilance too, but, and I just remember we were on a boat, and I just felt so effing anxious. Like, I think she asked if we wanted to drive a go-kart, like, around this island in Mexico that we were at. And for whatever reason, I was just like so scared, like, of doing that. I was like, something just doesn't feel right about getting the cart. Like, I don't want to, like, something about it just didn't feel right. And I was just so anxious. And I remember I said yes. And then she was like, okay, like, we'll go ahead and do that. And then I was just anxious AF for like a solid 45 minutes. And she was like, what's wrong? And like, I was like, nothing's wrong. Like, I didn't want to say anything was wrong because I didn't want to rock the boat. I didn't want to disappoint her, right? Because people pleasers have this really strong belief that I'm responsible for other people's emotions.
Yeah.
So their discomfort becomes mine.
At the cost of your own.
Yes. And that's the codependency speaking. And then like, I remember we were talking, and then, after the fact, like after the trip, it was about a week later, and she was like, yeah, I felt really disconnected from you during the trip because like, I just felt like you were saying one thing, but I felt something else. And it's like when you are people pleasing, it actually continues to disconnect you from people that are closest to you because they don't actually know how to meet your needs.
Isn't that ironic? Because you're doing it so that they could be close to you, but you're pushing them away. Yeah.
It is. And it's been really healing for me to be friends with Emily because I remember her saying, you know, I can handle my own emotions. Like, it's okay. Like, I want to hear it. I want to hear what you're feeling. It makes me feel more disconnected and like uncomfortable because I feel the disconnect. And then that left her feeling hypervigilance because her body felt one thing and then I'm telling her another thing. It's like, and it's uncomfortable when you start to shed that people pleasing because you notice, oh, there's I can get abandoned here. But people who, like, also that's another thing that people don't talk about enough. It's like when you stop people pleasing, if you're in a toxic relationship, that's what magnetizes you towards emotionally unavailable people and toxic relationships because they thrive off you not having needs. They aren't willing to meet your needs. So when you can speak your needs, especially in dating early on and with friends and practice with friends, with other people and with yourself, like even going to the bathroom when you need to go to the bathroom or feeding yourself when you're hungry. It's like all these things will help you. And we can continue more on other ways to somatically heal the fawn response. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love this. There were a couple of things that I wanted to talk about, but they've all floated out of my brain for some reason. This happens sometimes with this people pleasing. I love what you said about practice with friends because these are relational wounds, and you can read all the self-help books that you want. You can do all the work on your own. You can even, working with the therapist is also, that's a relationship where you're working on it, but out in the real world with people who are not mental health professionals or coaches, like that's the battleground to like really put the work into practice. And that's where you will heal it because you're going to learn over time that it is safe to say what's true for you. And I think the tricky part, like what you said about when you people please, that's what's attracting toxic people into your life. The tricky part is when you learn to not people please anymore and you speak up for yourself because you have toxic people around you. They are going to do what you fear most and they're going to get mad or they're going to not want to be your friend anymore. And it's really important to have support when you're going through that because they are making room for the people who are available. Like Megan, you said her name was? Megan?
Emily.
Emily. Why did I think
But Megan? It's funny that you said Megan because that was one of my first coaches who was like my first hypnotherapist that like changed my life. So like that's actually wild that you said that.
Do you think my body knew that?
Maybe. Shoot, that's so cool. That's crazy. But absolutely. It's like, it's so true. And even in my last relationship that was healthier and like a lot more secure, I was not people pleasing. And he didn't want me to people please. Like healthy people do not want you to people please. They want to know your truth. I remember
having my first like healthy relationship and when I was dating him, he was like, why do you say sorry all the time? It's like, you apologize for everything. Don't do that. Stop doing that. Who'd you date? Like your exes are assholes. Like, why are you saying sorry for every little thing? And I was like, you're right.
You're right.
I was like, thanks for that reflection.
Yes, that was literally the exact conversation I had with my previous partner, who was more like healthier. And that's so funny that you say that, because yes, a lot of people pleasers, they'll say sorry for everything because they're not used to taking up space. And even like my previous partner, even like towards the end, just our needs were very different, and we just weren't a good fit anymore. And towards the end, I was still communicating like my needs, and you know, even what was really healing for me, even like the breakup, he was like, your needs were never too much, never too much. And it was so healing for me. And it's like, yeah, it's like you need those disconfirming experiences. You need to have someone, I really feel like that co-regulation and that attunement, meaning, you know, you have someone reflecting back, listening, validating, helping you heal these wounds. But you also need those disconfirming experiences in the real world, and you need to build healthier relationships and go into that. A lot of people are afraid to do that, which is valid to feel afraid to do that. But like one of my clients is like, yeah, this psychic told me that, you know, I shouldn't get into another relationship for another few years because, you know, I have a lot more healing to do. While that can be true, also healing relationship wounds happens in relationship. We become traumatized from mostly other people. So when you get that healing in relationship, you're healing that original wound, and you learn that I can speak up for myself. You know, men or women now respect my boundaries. Everything starts to shift, and you begin to feel safer, even though initially it might feel uncomfortable and a little anxiety provoking.
Do you think, my husband and I always ponder this, do you think that going through trauma might make you smarter? So you did mention earlier about that therapist reflecting to you, like you're a lot smarter than your parents. And go ahead.
That's a fabulous question. So I have like two different thoughts here. I was even talking about this with one of my friends last weekend, not this specifically, but I feel that people who have been traumatized, they like, especially people who have been parentified, meaning you were given responsibilities that you were too young for. Like for me, that was taking care of my brother, like, and taking care of my father. That should not have been my role. Or you're the one taking care of your parent. That's like role reversal. And then you emotionally mature much quicker than your peers. And then you don't fit in and feel different because like your brain is literally completely different than someone your age. And so I feel like in that way, you can be a lot more emotionally mature if you're working through your stuff. If you're working through it. I feel like a lot of people who've experienced narcissistic abuse or trauma, what happens in the brain when you've experienced narcissistic abuse is your hippocampus actually begins to shrink, which is your logic, your thinking, your logical center of your brain where you house memory. And then your amygdala, which is where fear and anxiety come from in the brain, that becomes larger. So actually, this is where a lot of like ADHD comes in because you can't focus as much because this is smaller, and then the amygdala is so much larger. So you can actually like feel a lot more dumb when you also have experienced trauma. So there's like two sides to the coin there.
Yeah.
I feel like either one can be true.
Yeah.
Like I would say I would have ADHD or that protector part.
Yeah.
And so but I feel like a lot of people, and I would say I am very intelligent, and I feel I'm much different than typical people, typical 20, mid-20s people are. So maybe there's some truth to that. I wish I could say like a final like yes or no, but I think it's more gray in this way.
Yeah, there's definitely so many factors,
Yes.
There's so many factors that affect us, whether or not we experience trauma. So
yes. And like genetics wise, like
our environment, what race
school.
we are, and like what country we live in, and how you get treated based on your race. Like there's so many aspects.
So
the
many
food
things,
you have
so
access to, because that affects your brain. There's so many. There's so many layers.
so many. So many. Even like I learned in my early 20s when I had so much chronic pain.
Mm-hmm.
I was gluten sensitive. My best friend also has celiac disease, and she's like, even the other day we were talking about it, and she's like, I swear, like, you have celiac. You have like the same symptoms as me when I eat gluten, and she has celiac disease. But like the difference with me is like I got blood tested and it didn't come back positive for celiac, with gluten. But it's like, yeah, I was eating gluten for 2 decades, and it's like, bruh, like no wonder why I was so even more dysregulated on top of that. It was like a chemical stressor to my body. And that was to my body. Other people, and especially other countries, like they don't spray glyphosate on their gluten, and it can be different. And everyone reacts different to different foods. For me, it does not bode well with gluten, but it's like so many things impact your brain, your attachment style. Like if I eat gluten, it is very hard for me to regulate myself. I'll feel very dysregulated.
Moral of the podcast: stop eating bread and you'll heal your trauma. Just kidding.
Yeah, she's being sarcastic, guys.
All right, this has gone by really fast. I want to move into the closing questions, and I definitely feel like I need to have you back because I feel like there's so many other things we did not talk about. But to move into our closing questions, what does self-love mean to you?
What first came to my mind is self-acceptance. Because when you can learn to accept yourself as you are, naturally self-love arises from that. When you can learn to accept yourself, you have so much power. Like I have accepted that for me, I do have that distractor ADHD part, and it can be more difficult sometimes to get things done. But it's like, that is just and that's something that I continuously improve and I'm trying to work on, and I have to have certain things in place. But it's like, I just accept that this is me, like this is my part, and I love deeply. I have such a big open heart, and it's like that's something that I love and accept about myself. When I accepted that, that's when I love myself. When you can accept yourself, you can love yourself. That's the first step.
I can feel that open heart, and this is only my second time being on a call with you. So,
aw, thank you. I so appreciate that reflection.
I see that. Okay, the next question is, what makes you feel the most grounded?
What makes me feel the most grounded? I feel like multiple things make me feel very, very grounded. I'll say 2 things. Brain spotting. So I know we talked about, like, I'll just say a really quick thing about brain spotting. And just like to give a tip, if you're someone who struggles with anxious attachment or you're very anxious, with brain spotting, I talked to Celia about, okay, you identify what amplifies those feelings of anxiety. You can do the same thing with a safe part of your body. I call it safe spotting. So you can also look around the room and find a place that feels soothing. This could even be looking at your cat. A lot of my clients have animals. They're like, I look at my cat and my dog, I feel safe, feel calm. Looking at like a painting, that your friend made for you, that makes me feel calm. You can look around the room and find a spot that feels calm and safe. That like really helps me feel grounded. And recently, meditation, like walking meditations, I did one today that like lit a fire up my ass, like in a good way. Like it was fabulous. There was one by Dr. Joe Dispenza. I don't know if you're into him or his work, but the meditation is called Prayer. It's Walking Meditation 6. It's so good. If you're someone who like you struggle with motivation or you're in the freeze response, like you go more towards depression, like walking meditations are great. And I just think they're fun. Like they just take things to such another level, and they just like really help me. Help me feel grounded.
Yeah. Yeah. When you mention ADHD, it makes sense that walking meditation would be helpful for you. And as someone who's a trained meditation instructor, meditation is not always sitting still and sitting down.
Correct.
Even dancing can be a meditation. Even drawing can be a meditation. There's so many things that could be a meditation that I don't think people know about. So then they think meditation is not for them, when really everyone needs it, especially now with how fast the world moves. Yeah. We need those moments to stop and pause.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, I have one more question, and then we'll get into where people can connect with you and your work and all that stuff.
Fabulous.
I like to do a dramatic pause before this question because it's my favorite. Dramatic pause. What is your favorite part about being a woman?
What a great question. I love that question. Wow. Okay. I love that question. I have to like tune in and think about that for a second.
Take your time.
Yeah. What is my favorite part about being a woman? Honestly, like, I guess like multiple parts. Like, I just love being a woman. Like, I love supporting women. I just think we have such this is my answer. The intuitiveness that comes to being a woman. My favorite part about being a woman is truly how connected I am to my intuition. I used to not be, and that really has a lot to do with trauma work, but even men can be very connected with their intuition. But women, like, it's been like research that like women are just much more connected to their emotions and their body just because of the nature of our hormonal cycle, our menstrual cycle, the fact that we have children. Like, we're made to be intuitive and connected to our bodies. And so I just love being so connected to my body and my intuition and honestly supporting women. Like, I love women. Majority of clients who come into my practice are women. I do love to help men as well. But yeah, I absolutely love it.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
And for everyone who is listening, I will pass the mic to you to share where people can find you, what you have going on, how people can work with you, all the things.
Yes. So the best place for someone to find me is my Instagram. It's Heal with Val, HEAL with VAL. And then also I have lots of freebies on my Instagram on like I made an amazing like EFT tapping meditation to heal your fear of abandonment. So if you struggle with people pleasing, struggle with anxious attachment, fear of abandonment, that's going to be so healing for you. I also have a like people pleasing masterclass where I like somatically teach you how to stop self-abandoning and people pleasing using somatic exercises and nervous system regulation. It's only $20. It's a 2-hour long workshop packed with such powerful tools and practices for you to use. And then I have my 8-week one-on-one freedom from anxious attachment blueprint, which teaches you literally step-by-step how to actually heal your nervous system, how to go from anxious to securely attached and stop the race of constantly, ending up with emotionally unavailable or avoidant partners.
Yay. Yes. Okay. So links to all of that I'll include in the show notes or in the caption if you're watching this on YouTube. And I'll ask you before we stop the recording if there's any closing thought you want to leave off with.
Yes, your attachment style is not fixed. That is not your identity. You are not just an anxious person. You are not just an anxiously attached person. You are a human being with a beautiful soul with so much love to give. And it is not fixed. This is something that can literally be healed and you can become more securely attached. You can become more secure. You can feel safe in your body. You aren't meant to just feel anxious, pay bills, and die.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
Yeah, I'm like, wow, I was like, wow, that was pretty blunt, Valerie.
I'm going to share before we close. I just want to reflect something that you shared earlier that you said your ex said to you, but I want to say it to the listeners. And what I want to say is your needs are never too much. Your needs are never too much. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you next week. Bye.